Good evening. You are watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with Dave Frank. We are discussing national news of the day. The first topic is actually kind of global in nature, the climate. I mean, we haven't really talked a lot about it on this show lately, but it is scorching, breaking records and causing problems all over. People are actually dying in some of the places. We'll talk about what's going on in the Northeast and in the plains, but also in Europe and other places right now. Africa, there's are places in Ethiopia where it hasn't rained in 6 years. It is really bad, and yet we just can't seem to make any progress or any significant progress. You know, our country is probably the worst in terms of carbon emissions, and we had, we had a build back better bill that had been somewhat aggressive, had been really chopped down to make Manchin happy. We're not even talking about Sinema anymore. She didn't even have that many objections to it, but Manchin, as after the inflation report said, people don't care about this; they only care about their day-to-day life. But when the 9 point whatever, I think it was 9.2, I can't remember, inflation rate report
One, I
came
think.
out, 9.1 he said we cannot afford this right now, and he said that he would not agree to any of the climate measures. And so it looks like he's scrambling. He's sort of backed off it, said, well, maybe next month we can take a look at the report because there's been a lot of backlash against him. Sanders really attacked him on the Sunday morning shows last weekend. Other Democrats
Yeah.
are basically saying he's persona non grata. If the Democrats ever come back to power, they're talking about if they don't need his vote, they're not even going to bother to call him, talk to him about anything. Anyways, Biden is now talking about executive action. He held a press conference today talking about what he can do. We'll get into what he can do, the political and legal limitations of it. In the meantime, Governor Newsom, who's been hinting at possibly running for president in 2024, is making it a centerpiece of his campaign. Is this a winning issue politically right now? Dave, why don't you start off with, there's a lot to discuss here.
Yeah. Well, thank you for framing it the way you did and getting it kicked off. So the big news, I guess, of the moment is, like you said, Biden gave a press conference today. He went to a defunct coal production facility that is going to be converted to producing, I think, wind turbines. So that to him, to the administration, to the White House, is symbolic of the type of vision that'd be necessary to sort of turn a brownfield into a greenfield, and in this case, truly a greenfield, by embracing the transition. I'm going to give a quote. He said, "As president, I have responsibility to act with urgency and resolve when our nation faces clear and present danger." And that's what climate change is all about. It's literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger. The health of our citizens and our communities is literally at stake. But he didn't go so far as to declare an emergency because of the implications of what that would mean. So he kind of walked the tightrope a little bit of standing behind his green energy values without maybe meeting exactly the progressives where they wanted him to be, which I think would sort of unlock extra steps, releasing of funds or mobilizing resources, etc. But he also, it wasn't just rhetoric. He announced, he was addressing specific issues. So creating opportunities for new offshore wind farm leases, and money, $2 billion to FEMA for cooling centers for areas that are hit really hard by extensive periods of temperatures above 100 degrees, and also giving money for low-income home energy assistance. So there was some degree of federal action at the executive level that's possible through the administrative office, like FEMA and other agencies that he manages.
But he's not going to do the more drastic stuff of cutting off oil exports or cutting off
Right.
offshore drilling or other drilling, right?
Right.
At least not now, because that would obviously drive up prices of oil. And right now, with gasoline, the price of gas having dropped about 50 cents over the past 2 months, he doesn't want to stop that. I mean, that's good
Yeah.
news for him. And also, he doesn't want to cut off exports and jeopardize the coalition against Russia right now, and
Totally.
affect international markets. He just can't do that right now.
Yeah, and so I'm glad you went in that direction, because really what we're talking about is there's this pragmatic middle road that he really wants to always try to walk down. I heard commentators say recently that, despite the rhetoric, we're just talking raw reality. There will always, in our lifetime, be a demand for carbon energy.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the projected increase of use of energy globally, it just goes up and up and up forever. As we add green capacity, when we started adding green capacity in the 70s, as we've added it, its energy usage has still gone up. We have not declined our carbon. So there's this expectation amongst sort of business folks, energy industry folks, strategic thinkers, that we a purely progressive vision of a transformative global economy with decarbonization may not be practical. And I want to mention this with two competing sets of opinions. One is that obviously Governor Newsom, he is all in on, hey, California is leading the way. And I think California should lead the way for lots of reasons. But California is leading the way on making, transformative changes and leading by example. And it's going to be, people talk about how, climate needs to change within 10 years, or we have an existential threat. We need to change our policies dramatically within a 10-year window, which we should, but that changing dramatically isn't the same thing as complete decarbonization. So Gavin Newsom, I think, is leading by example, but it's not fully pragmatic like for example, the president is trying to do. Manchin, on the other hand, is not pragmatic. He's a vested interest he's an energy interested player in the process, and that's why I think Bernie Sanders shredded him and saying he's not a credible negotiator when it comes to any of this. And we have to rule him out as somebody who's reasonable.
He doesn't want anything even started, because once any conversion is made, we've discussed this before, it doesn't go back. Any conversion towards this, right now, it was announced this morning. It wasn't executive action. It's been planned for a while, but the goal right now, I believe it's something like 30% of the post office fleet is electric. They want to move that to 80%. Everything short term, the house to house delivery, the entire fleet. That's actually a perfect type of vehicle to be electric. Stop and go, stop and go, stop and go. That's what you want to be electric. And they want to move towards that. Well, that investment in the industry actually helps to get prime the pump for further, when there's a big government investment like that, then it leads to more R&D and more development of it. So for California to do this, and of course we've got a great infrastructure for electric right now. We've got things in Lateville, we're in our own mall here. I mean, you don't even need 300 miles of a range to have electric in California. We could, you can do it with 50 miles here if you need to, right? I mean, it's just California is leading the way, and the electric cars are sold as soon as they get to the lot here in California. So definitely it's there, and yes, I think Manchin and the people that are backing him are afraid of that. And that's why they don't want the tax credits, because the minute people start buying this stuff in mass, it's, that it goes back to that documentary, Who Killed the Chevy electric car, that once you start the conversion, people don't go back. And they know that it starts off small. And gradually, we're never going to be 100% non-carbonized, and we don't have to be. It's just, it's. But.
So no, I'm with you. I'm totally with you, and in the sense that there's room for progress, and the more visionary leadership speaks and persuades the better. The question though is 100+ degree temperatures all over the place for extended periods of time that begins to actually kill and harm people. Like for example, in England right now, they're talking about, they design their buildings to retain heat, not to be ventilated because of
Right.
the climate that where everything was built, the time period where everything was built. So they don't have air conditioning, and there's lots of countries that don't have air conditioning, and people are absolutely being impacted in their well-being, health and well-being. So the reality on the ground could in fact help to persuade people, despite the rhetoric. So that
Yeah.
let's circle back to the political side of this, which is kind of I heard that only 6% of people in the United States are self-professed progressives, but you don't have to be a progressive to want progress. So
Right.
it takes leadership to explain that we can do. We don't have to. We don't have to. What's the word? That there's hyperbole and exaggeration that happens in the political arena, that bipolar tug of war about how you're either AOC or Trump or something. You know what I mean? That there's these two massive extremes. The extremes that dominate our mainstream media and our bandwidth, and to a certain extent our dialogue. That doesn't have to be this way. Common sense can prevail, but it takes common sense leadership, and I think Biden is trying to do that, and that's part of the reason why it's an all-in strategy of really placating both the green investments at the same time that put it this way: the United States is the single biggest exporter of oil right now. We used to think Saudi Arabia was an amazing exporter. Saudi Arabia has the most capacity to expand their production. But I think top three, I just heard the other day, top three are U.S., Saudi Arabia, Russia. So the United States is in the game, and much of that is for export. So it's one of those things where not to say that a comprehensive, holistic approach to this is going to happen between now and November, nor between now and 2024. But in theory, we actually will start a more responsible, measured, constructive, bipartisan dialogue. It's just not happening currently.
Just a quick mention on that 6% identifying themselves as progressive. Identification is more often than not a cultural identification more than a strict political one. I believe that about 15 to 20% of people in a poll years ago identified themselves as liberal. I believe that something like 20 to 30% of African Americans identified themselves as liberal. However, 80 to 90% of African Americans vote more liberal than self-identified liberals. Once you define them politically, it's a cultural identification.
Sure.
A lot of people don't, so it's just people don't like to call themselves certain things because they're identified with certain types of things. But anyway, so who knows what that even means? But go ahead.
I was going to say, point well taken. I mean, that's
yeah.
kind of what I was throwing that out there as, like,
Yeah.
It is a culture war era right now, and the main arguments and disagreements may not be actually on the facts, and instead
Right.
they're on the hype, and so it's really hard for everybody projects on Biden that he's such a progressive, but in fact there's not a whole lot that's happening.
Yeah.
Yes, on the cultural side, he's walking the walk with people who are visionary about cultural issues, but he's not actually advancing economic and structural changes in any way that would provide meaningfully progressive policies, particularly I think on the side of energy, but there are others too.
But I think Newsom is going to have an interesting strategy here, because he is going to come. He's going to show everybody, the rest of the country, what we have here, the infrastructure. He's probably going to go on a tour showing what we have, and the fact and it's only going to get worse. People are going to suffer in states. Some of those states are red states, for instance, and some of the so it's going to become a day-to-day issue. Manchin says, "Oh, that's not a day-to-day issue." It will become a day-to-day issue, and so it'll be interesting to see if this becomes something that Newsom over the next couple of years can make into it. Especially as one of the things about inflation, is that the Republicans right now want to make that the issue. But if inflation is tamed by November, people aren't going to vote. Man, I was really mad back in November, March about that inflation. Okay, maybe they'll still be smarting because they're still recovering economically from it. But other issues take precedence after a while. And Newsom's got 2 years. They'll definitely won't be thinking about that inflation back in 2022 by then. And there's a lot to be proud of that California has done, and will be way ahead. So it'll be very interesting to see how he presents it. But there are some other good candidates out there too. So we'll see.
Yeah, I know we have just a limited amount of time left on this topic, but I do think one of the items that you pointed out that we need to address, and I glossed over it earlier, but declaring a climate emergency at the presidential level and sort of unlocking extraordinary, would be in effect wartime powers, could conceivably be. That's not impossible, and it arguably would advance the cause, but it's not pragmatic. And I know I focused on the tail end of that earlier, but so for example, the wind farms and solar policies, other countries have done amazing things like Germany, but still need to fall back with solar. For example, we won't get into that, but there are many European countries that are doing amazing things, but they still fall back on gas for heat in the winter. So it's a complicated message that doesn't actually tailor itself to inspiring people. Solving problems is a little bit more challenging than rhetoric.
Yeah. Well, anyway, if you spend some money that opens up some jobs for some construction of some electric infrastructure, he can win some points that way. That's all he really needs to do. Okay, that takes us to our next topic.
And the mayor was definitely intoxicated. There were suggestions by, I believe it was Mayor Giuliani, to go and declare victory and say that we won it outright.
It was far too early to be making any calls like that. Ballots were still being counted.
I don't know that I had a firm view as to what he should say in that circumstance. The results were still being counted.
Did you ever share, Mr. Kushner, your view of Mr. Giuliani? Did you ever share your perspective about him with the president?
I guess, yes.
Tell me what you said.
Basically, not the approach I would take if I was you.
We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
All right, January 6th, we got to talk about it tomorrow night, 5 o'clock Pacific time, 8 o'clock Eastern time. This is a prime time hearing again. This hearing is dedicated to the 187 minutes of what was President Trump doing during the time that the Capitol was being stormed. It's going to basically do a juxtaposition as to what was happening and what he was doing. The primary witnesses are going to be Matthew Pottinger and Sarah Matthews. Matthew Pottinger says he decided to resign the minute Trump tweeted about how Pence was going to get what he deserved, and the Sarah Matthews was an aide about the age of Cassidy Hutchinson, also just completely blown away by it. Matthew Pottinger is no liberal, no progressive. He actually says he remains proud of some of the accomplishments the Trump administration did, but he says this was absolute. I believe he has used the word treason. And believes that this, really needs to, there really needs to be some changes. Meanwhile, there is a bipartisan bill talking about how to protect the electoral college system, talking about protections, doubling punishment for intimidating election workers, a bunch of different things that we can also talk about. There's also news. It's not directly related to January 6th, but kind of related in Georgia. The fake electors, it looks like they're going to be charged. Subpoenas going out, for the people that were involved in the phone calls, including our favorite senator from South Carolina.
Yeah.
He fought it. and is but he's lost that fight. It looks like he's going to go down and try to fight it down in Georgia, but he looks like he's going to be in there. The drama continues. I mean, it just it doesn't stop. But Graham looks like he's going to have to testify, and meanwhile the Bannon trial has started. And they're making an appeal to the jury to try to argue that it was all politicized. And then we have the texts that just as January 6th committee was trying to subpoena them, the Secret Service said, we erased them as part of a routine, routine something. I forget exactly what it was. And then they
tried the equipment upgrade. It was the equipment upgrade. They're upgrading their phones.
Right, and then they said, maybe we can, get them back. Oh, and they only got one back, Anyway, one text, yeah, and it was what did it say? Something smells fishy or something like that, which is really ironic. Anyway, a lot going on, but we will be. By the way, you and I will be commenting on it on KMUD tomorrow night. So on the hearings live. So it'll begin at 5:00 our time, and it should be. Again, interesting. They continue, Dave, a lot to talk about there.
Yeah, again, but this is great. I like how you frame it. This was working well. So you've created a picture of a lot of wheels in motion. A lot of plates are being spun at the same time here. I think we'll start at the beginning. So at the top, first and foremost, the hearings. The January 6th committee has been building up the backstory. So people had some context about various elements of the plan, the strategy of Trump's team, the awareness that that strategy was happening and that it was fraudulent and that it was intentional, and the live action of the events of the day leading up to the storming, and then now they are actually going to go in minute detail what the inaction. So I think, they, like you said, they were on the Sunday morning shows, these witnesses and people commenting about what to expect from those witnesses. One, a National Security Council, basically a high level person, and also a deputy press secretary. So these are people that were very supportive of the administration up until the point that they realized what was happening. And so now I think the point is that if the president wasn't part of it and he didn't want it to happen, then why was he watching it on TV and telling people he was happy it was happening and tweeting that he was happy that it was happening? And I think that might be, it's almost like deprogramming cult members. It takes a very, very long time. So it's cause and effect, and cause and, we could talk about sort of cognitive belief reinforcement, but that's really what's happening. They're trying to show cause and effect. And so that's, I think, that's why you and I are going to be commenting on to see what happens and how it's received. As far as the Bannon trial, that's sort of a sideshow because Bannon was making a defense saying, I have all these claims that I don't have to tell you what I was telling the president. But he was going on TV and going on podcasts and he was saying those very things. So the court said, you don't have an affirmative defense. That's not a defense. So this is so far a very short trial about him dragging his feet and not obeying a subpoena. It's really limited to that. And one of his defenses is that, I've agreed to go testify now. And that's not an affirmative defense for why he didn't obey the subpoena. It's contempt. He still is in contempt. Exactly that. We could go into more detail a little bit, but two more things from my preliminary impressions. Graham did accept the subpoena. He's going to fight. He's going to fight against, hey, I didn't say what you say I said in these calls to try to influence people, part of a conspiracy to put to influence the outcome of an election. But he did make the calls. So his lawyers probably told him, you have to account for your actions and you have to account for the things that you've said to try to influence the election counting process. So he's very, I think eventually they're going to try to get him to testify about things that he said to other people about elements of this conspiracy. And then finally, the erased text. Me and you talked about this at length once before on this show, but the Secret Service is a very special body, and it's got a very privileged position within our structure, and I'd never at any point expected any of the bodyguards and secret, private police force of the White House to be used in an attack on the credibility of the White House. So I've said this consistently all along. I didn't expect that this would be something that became part of the public record. Certainly, to a certain extent, it probably should all be classified anyway. So this gives them a public face to, at least for 20 years or so, like they did with Nixon and JFK, and they still hide JFK facts. They probably still hide tons of things that they're aware of, but on purpose because of the unique role they have in our system. And that this gives them a credible plan to just not be part of it. We upgraded our phones. We lost all the data. What about the backups? Nope, that's classified. No one's allowed to talk about it publicly. Sorry. No, there was no backups. Yeah, it was terrible. I think I call it the theory of potential plausibility. It is potentially plausible that they did this without malice and without backup. And the latter, without backup, is highly suspect. But that's the way the cookie crumbles. I don't think we're going to actually get to see those texts at any time for decades.
But the timing is really, I mean, that is one coincidental timing. Now, they claim that they didn't get it. Even though the request was before the erasing, they claim that the message didn't get to them until afterwards. I mean, okay, maybe, but boy, that is really strange timing. I mean, is it plausible? Yeah. But they haven't been acting in a way lately that makes them very credible. I mean, they've been acting strange, but then Secret Service always acts kind of strange, right? Yeah. That's their job. So it's just, they are being really kind of quirky and with regard to Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony. I mean, did they have a scuffle with Trump or didn't they? Well, it's too far back in the limo, but then now we've got at least one of the Metropolitan Police saying, well, actually that did happen, right? So what's the story? Is it, well, we want them to testify, but it's not customary for our agents to testify under oath because they might be asked the wrong question, and it's just, I mean, and then maybe you shouldn't have members of your service be publicly political about something because Ornato is publicly a supporter of Trump, and maybe that's inappropriate, right? I mean, it's just so because that cuts into your credibility here, and it's just there's so many questions, and maybe it's all innocent, maybe they got legitimate reasons, but man, it looks bad.
Yeah, and not to dwell and give extra weight to this topic, but there has been testimony that Vice President Pence's security detail said to his colleague on President Trump's former President Trump's security detail, now an assistant aide to assistant chief of staff, I think his title was, that if it was up to you guys, Pence would be in Alaska. He'd get in that car and he would be in Alaska, and he would basically, Trump would get his way. And that part of the Secret Service said, we're not doing that. We're gonna get back in there. We're gonna do this thing, and we're gonna have the peaceful transfer of power. So yes, it's very coincidental and suspicious. The Inspector General's office, I think, is the title of the person who gave the letter that said the timing was apparently not appropriate, and so we need to look further. I don't think we're going to end up looking much further.
I want to spend just a little bit on the electors in Georgia. Now, these fake electors, They're like, well, we weren't being fraudulent. We were up front. We weren't being secretive or anything. Doesn't matter. Does it? You do not represent yourself as an elector. And the lawyers are objecting because they said initially the prosecutors told them that they were witnesses, not necessarily targets or people of interest in terms of being charged. But this isn't a game. and they're about to learn a hard lesson there. They may be charged. They're being asked to go. They're being commanded to go to a grand jury, and it may happen elsewhere in the country as well. This was not a game. I mean, they got caught up in this movement, and they may learn the hard way. This was not a game. Their hero may not go to jail. I mean, he finds all kinds of ways of skating, but people under him do, just like what happened with Nixon. He didn't go to jail, but people under him did. It's just, it's the way it falls. Well, don't be stupid next time. Sorry.
Yeah, you mentioned other states. There was some graphic or colorful, I guess, descriptions about Michigan, how some of these folks were planning on sleeping in the state house so that they would not miss the opportunity to represent Michigan. There was a different story in Arizona about how some other similar nefarious strategy to get false electors put forward. And you mentioned not being a game. The fact that Bannon and Peter Navarro were openly, publicly talking, about the Green Bay sweep strategy. For folks who missed that so far, they were saying if we use overwhelming force of will, we will be able to do what Coach Vince Lombardi was able to do on the football field and just get our way just by sheer brute force. And so what that meant in this context was they were just going to push and push and push. So that on January 6th, it was the case that there was enough people who were going to stop, in effect, overwhelm the capacity for that peaceful transfer of power. And they thought that was whether they thought it or not, their plan was that was constitutionally viable based on Eastman, the attorney Eastman strategy, for folks who don't remember that. Basically saying the vice president is the only this was their claim, that the vice president was the only constitutionally valid person who could accept the electors and accept that count on that day, and that in fact many people have commented since then saying it's not even true. The whole plan of overwhelming the system is not even true, which goes back to what you said. There's bipartisan support behind a bill. It appears that they may actually get the support that they need to kind of prevent that particular weakness in the peaceful transfer of power from happening again. Just to make it explicitly clear that the vice president serves a symbolic role instead of an authoritative role.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it's it's amazing how many people think certain things are constitutional, like the filibuster. It is not in the Constitution. A lot of things are not in the Constitution that people will assume. I mean, anyway, it's there a lot more to happen. Anyway, we are going to have to move on, but we'll be talking about this next week.
One of the worst, most damaging decisions in modern history.
We could pass a law to protect every woman's right to an abortion, and we should do that.
If this turns out to be the opinion of the court and it's issued, it could have a major impact on the outcome of this election.
Whoever committed this lawless act knew exactly what it could bring about.
Whoever did this leak should be prosecuted and should go to jail for a very long time. This has shaken the independence and the ability of the judiciary to function.
If the rationale of the decision as released were to be sustained, a whole range of rights are in question.
Okay, final segment. We talk a lot about the culture war and whether or not it's been won. It's never won. It's always it's an ongoing thing, and it changes and it shifts. But Roe v. Wade has been overturned. We've discussed this, even though the majority of people are pro-choice to the extent that whether or not they support abortion, the majority of people do not believe that the government should be involved in that decision. There are people who support abortion rights completely, do not believe that there is a human soul in a child that has not been born, or at least in the first couple of trimesters. And then there are the people who believe that maybe it is, but just do not believe that the government should be involved in that decision, period. And that, and then you have you have this decision, and you have Republicans that are squirming, and they made a big Republicans in Ohio. Some of the leadership made a big mistake last week. I mean, they just went all out. And when you don't know, you don't shoot off your mouth. But there was an incident in which a 10-year-old girl was brought across the state line from Ohio into Indiana, and a doctor, with permission from the parents, did the procedure, but also announced, made it publicly known that this girl was the victim of a rape. 10 years old. And all of a sudden, these Republican officials said, whoa, we don't believe that. We don't know anything about that. We would know about it if that happened. Well, sir, after they shut off their mouth, I think the very next day, a 27-year-old individual was arrested and is being charged for this rape. And then all of a sudden, they all went quiet. No apologies. They still want to go after the doctor as if she's done something wrong, and in the meantime, a lot of Republicans who, even people who didn't do it are like, oh man, that was a PR disaster. And Democrats and pro-choice forces are all over. They're fundraising off of it. They're pushing it, but in the meantime, institutionally, the abortion's in trouble, even if culturally the society is behind it. Meanwhile, in terms of gay marriage, it's in trouble. Clarence Thomas made reference to the fact that, okay, that's next, right? And Senator Cruz went in a rant about how that decision was wrong. So the House just passed a resolution to protect it, to protect that decision, to codify it. We'll see if that gets deemed a federal overreach. We've talked about that. 47 Republicans voted to protect it. And now the Republicans are a little bit in a quandary, because will they have 10 Republicans to override a filibuster? They probably have a few Republicans who will vote to support it, but can they override a filibuster on it and not be the party of blocking that? Because again, there are people, even evangelical Christians, who say, well, I don't believe in marriage other than between a man and a woman, but I don't believe that it's my choice to say who can live with who, right? There has been a cultural shift in terms of, allowing individuals their autonomy here. So as the federal court slides one way, the culture has slid the other way, and Republicans are feeling the pinch, and they're worried that if the economy doesn't govern this coming election, they could be in a little bit of trouble here. They are sweating right now. Dave, what do you want to say about this?
Yeah, so state of the culture war. These two themes, these two policy areas that you spoke of that are getting traction now. I think we're hearing more from the legislature about more positive, I would argue, from the legislature about protecting gay marriage. In part because there are significant number of Republicans who acknowledge that marriage as an institution is something that is conservative, and that there's been a track record of the country getting increasingly more supportive of expanding that right to everyone. And so it could hurt them legislatively. Sorry, it could hurt them electorally. So I think that's why you're seeing legislative endorsement. And it's one of the ones where we even in the Senate side, they already have a significant number of people who are not saying no. So they've got 4 that have said yes so far, that they would support it. I think it's the usual suspects: Rob Portman, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Tom Tillis of North Carolina. Right. But then there's also another larger group of like 16 that have basically said maybe, and they only need 10. Yeah. So it's very likely.
Right, and they don't need somebody even to vote yes necessarily. They just have to vote not to filibuster. I mean, there really has to be a revitalization of the idea that voting no means you have to filibuster. I mean, that that right now the idea is that a filibuster is a no vote and not filibustering is a yes vote. They got to get over this.
Yeah. And so I anticipate progress there. And so the other side, the other issue that we talked about in this segment today is Roe. And so there, the big news this week was that there was a protest that resulted in a large number of of Democratic Congress members getting arrested. And it was sort of staged and known that it was going to happen. The police had a pre-recorded message just to let them know they were going to get arrested. So there was a little bit of theater involved in it. But the idea from the perspective of the Democrats is that they know that there's a huge amount of the population thinks it should be abortion should be safe, rare, and legal, basically. Mm-hmm. And then, but then there's a small percentage of the population that is adamant that, hey, if you give in at all, then it's murder and evil, and so I think that I guess the theme today is moderation, but under the current climate, the Republicans have no safe space at all. With the Supreme Court air quotes victory, they're able to it's a transformative moment in the legal history of the country. They're certainly not going to support the Democratic bill. At least you wouldn't think they would support any Democratic bill to codify some of those rights, even though a pragmatic approach that acknowledged that it's protecting privacy, protecting the family's right to choose what's best for them would have allowed the 10-year-old who was the victim of rape to their family could sort of quietly manage that problem. It wouldn't be a public spectacle, but for some reason this is we have devolved to the state of public spectacle and hyperbole and as we talked about, it's all on trench warfare, and it's particularly when it comes to Roe.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a shift. Culture is advancing, regardless of what the political, what the politics is. We definitely have made progress in a lot of areas in terms of racism, and we probably need to start codifying everything because nothing is safe. Right? If the Democrats really want to make a point about this last ruling, is that no rights that have been declared by the courts that is not specifically enumerated is safe. And they should just probably start passing bills to codify the right to interracial marriage because, hey, that's not specifically in the Constitution. The right to travel, because that's not the right to contract, because that's not in the Constitution. The right to innocent until proven guilty, that's not in the Constitution. They should just one after another to point out that nothing like that is safe if it's not specifically in there, to really make a point as to how radical this Supreme Court majority is. I just think that they need to do that, and then to put the Republicans in a position of having to oppose it or vote for it, because one way or another, if they vote for it, then they're acknowledging that there's a problem. If they vote against it, what, you're against innocent until proven guilty? How radical are you? I mean, it just would be a framework.
No, I'm with you, and I think to a certain extent, when I first started contemplating these concepts many years ago, I thought that there was this thing called discourse where you have the pros and the cons and you negotiate and you say, well, these are the reasons why we should do this and these are the reasons why we shouldn't. And that, at the end of the day, people call it making the sausage, like the politics is making the sausage. Mm-hmm. And that, which basically means you don't want to see how it's made because they're, butchers do awful things to animals. But then at the end of the day, you've got this thing you can deal with. And so I think that the way this comes through, this awful metaphor maybe, is that right now, they don't want to accomplish anything. It doesn't seem like there's very much that they really intend to accomplish other than the perpetuity or continuation of their power and ability to influence events and hand out to the victor goes the spoils and favoritism. And it's I hate to be so cynical, but that sort of seems to be why 60% of the people don't vote, and why the approval ratings of every institution are low, but the approval ratings of Congress are the lowest of any institution. even lower than Biden. You know, people say, oh, people don't like Joe Biden, what he's doing, his leadership.
Yeah.
It's not that the president can accomplish all these things. And so one last comment here is that, like you said, well, what do you do about it? Well, with a radical court like this, in their theories, and as cases work through the Supreme Court, it's possible that all those things that you mentioned, all those rights that we've come to expect that come from the right to privacy, would not stand up in court. From a conservative, from a Republican perspective, they say, oh, well, states' rights, let's let the legislatures deal with this. But that if it was the national legislature that dealt with it, that would make sense to codify it at the national level. But because states have to respect many of each other's policies, like, for example, marriage. You get married in one state, as long as it's legally recognized in that state, it's supposed to be legally recognized in all states. And so that's a type of
unfortunately,
reciprocity.
Under Clinton, we passed the Defense of Marriage Act, which says you don't have to recognize the other marriage if it's gay marriage. That was Clinton who signed that, by the way. It passed by a Republican majority Congress, but still. But anyway, just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did, because that makes the point that sometimes these politicians are reading the polling, and they're saying, well, I wish that I could maintain my power and influence, so I'm going to put my finger to the wind and read the tea leaves and say, well, people are really emotional about the term marriage. They just want the right to have a civil union. So we got civil unions out of that path, where you could say, well, you can get some of the legal benefits of marriage, but no, we can't call it marriage because that's such a traditionally loaded word that it's too offensive to people that are traditionalists, I guess we can say. But in reality, the general public is really moving much more quickly, not to say quickly, but much more thoroughly, and it's ingrained. It's an ingrained value in people. One last thing I'll mention on this is, I heard somebody say, hey, if people want to get married, then let them, because I'm miserable in my marriage. I heard one of the Republican congressmen said that in defense of why he voted the way he did. I thought that was really funny.
Oh, I remember Bruce Anderson of the Anderson Valley Advertiser when the thing passed, saying now gay couples can enjoy the wonders of divorce court as well.
Yeah.
Exactly. But anyway, I mean, there's a lot to be said here in terms of where when the culture is so different from the institution. We've got this Supreme Court majority that is so far out of touch with where the culture is, and it's going to be that way because the culture is going to continue to move. And is the Supreme Court going to be this intransigent and out of touch with the culture, and be more and more out of touch with it for how long? Until two of them die, basically. I mean, so much that it's just, this is going to be very interesting until something gives, until either the other two branches of government decide to do something about it, whether it's stacking, whether it's to remove life, terms or something like that. I mean, I don't know. They may have the power to do that. I don't think life terms is in the Constitution, for instance. So, until something like that happens, this is going to be very interesting because they are, I think Clarence Thomas says, I'm not beholden to this culture. I'm beholden to the culture of when the Constitution was written back then. Right. That's the culture. That's the culture that defines this country forever. I mean, right. That's basically what he says. The culture of when any particular amendment was written. The 14th Amendment defined by the values then. It doesn't make any sense as to why anything would be written that way. Just it's insane. But that's the way they look at it. This is Arcadia, not Utopia. Arcadia, not Utopia. So it's insane. And but this is going to be the tension for a long time because the culture is not going to stop changing because the Supreme Court wants it to, and it's going to be a very lonely institution.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, my final thought on this is just to reiterate sort of what I was saying before, which is, the president does have some authority, like, for example, with contraception, the idea that it's regulated at the federal level and that states shouldn't be able to block the ability for people to that if a person gets a prescription from their doctor and it's illegal, if it's legal federally, that they should be allowed to ship it. It might push things into sort of like brown wrappers or something like that, like where you don't know what's being shipped, because it's I just can't picture a surveillance apparatus at a state level and a conservative Republican leadership of that state being able to justify the pervasiveness of surveillance that would be necessary to invade people's privacy, getting in between them and their doctors and them and their medications and them and their family planning. Maybe in the heat of the moment, it seems like a political winner for them. But when it comes to it, I think it won't take very long before people start to reject that sort of obscene violation of privacy that people come to expect.
Yeah, no, I just want to clarify that what this law would do is to repeal the Defense of Marriage Act, part of it. That was just passed. It would enshrine it. It would actually make it so that people could get married in any state. But even if it gets overturned as a federal overreach, you would still, your marriage, if the Defense of Marriage Act gets repealed, pardon me, if even the Defense of Marriage Act would be repealed. So even if the Supreme Court says, no, Congress, you didn't have the right to force Indiana or Oklahoma to accept a gay marriage, the Full Faith and Credit Act will require, if it's a marriage in California and then that married couple moves to Oklahoma, by their doctrine, they can't stop you. I mean, they would have to abandon their doctrine, and that would be a very interesting moment. Do they serve their God or their doctrine? Anyway, let's just be more on that to come. So, well, that takes us to our final segment. Okay, Dave, what have you got for predictions?
So for predictions, maybe you could guess from how we spoke about in the last segment, this Respect for Marriage Act that passed the House overwhelmingly and got the support of 47 Republicans. It's going to go to the Senate, where they would need to overcome the threat of a filibuster, and they're already nearly halfway there, with about 3 times as many senators saying they're just going to hold off and see how this thing goes, that are necessary, that will be needed to overcome that filibuster. And like you said, this would be overturning or repealing the 1996 Defense of Marriage Act. 2 elements of this, which maybe we didn't touch on the second element. In addition to guaranteeing same-sex marriages, it would also guarantee interracial marriages under federal law. So it's kind of a twofer in the sense that 2 of those fundamental freedoms that the Supreme Court, when they overturned Roe, that I think that this will actually give enough cover to the Republicans, who are basically moderate and thoughtful, that they would be able to not vote for the filibuster, not support a filibuster, which would allow a true vote to happen in the Senate for this thing to get passed.
Interesting. I'd be curious to see if it angers evangelicals in their base, though. All right, I'm going to be real quick here. As I mentioned earlier in the show, the price of gas has now dropped for something like 4 weeks in a row. It's down to under $4.50, possibly could be under $4 by the end. This is really interesting because this is peak time. This is when gas prices should be going up normally, but a number of factors that I'm not going to go into have caused it to drop. And by the end of summer, that's when things drop, because that's when demand continues to drop. So unless there's some sort of emergency, something that happens, prices probably aren't going to go up again for quite a while. This means inflation can go down, and then there's other reasons that inflation may drop as well. It's not going to get back to 2 or 3% anytime soon, but it could drop down to like 5%. If inflation drops significantly in August and again in September, it's not going to be quite the issue that the Republicans hoped it would be. I predict that if there is a significant drop in inflation, Republicans are going to be desperate to pivot to another issue. I believe you will start hearing about the border again. Haven't heard much about it, but all of a sudden you're going to be the border is going to become the big catch issue, and that will become the issue for the rallying cry for the Republicans going into September. Okay, well, that closes out the show. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.